Hey guys, this is Drew with Because Jiu-Jitsu, and I'm going to do a series for you that I'm calling Things I Wish I Knew When I Was a White Belt. So it's been 12 years since I've started Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. I've gotten all the way from white belt to black belt. But looking back, and especially now teaching people who are starting out, I'm starting to realize things that I'm teaching them now I wish I knew back when I started, that I feel would really help to have built me and get me through some of those harder, rougher patches if I had known it earlier. So hopefully these will help you in that way. Feel free to drop any comments if you've got questions about these. We'll start rifling through them. So the first point for this video is Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is about making space and taking space. So what I mean by that is you're either going to be taking space away from your opponent depending on what your objective is, or you're going to be making space depending on where you are. Oftentimes on bottom, it's about making space. Somebody's trying to hold you down, you need to make frames, you need to make space. When you're on top, you need to do the exact opposite. But sometimes, depending what your objective is in either position, it can flip. So it's super important to understand where you are and what your objective is. Is it about making space? Is it about taking space? So on making space and taking space, it really depends on what your objective is and what position you're in. So let's say, for example, I have my opponent in closed guard here. I want to take his space away and limit where he can go right here. If we are in a position where I'm in side control, he's taking my space. My objective is to make space. If I don't make space, he's going to take everything that I can do away from me. So I need to start framing, opening things up. If we're back in closed guard and I need to make space here, I don't want to be here anymore, we can start using frames and opening up that space, coming away, taking it back, getting a dominant position. Am I making space? Do I need to take space? One of those things is going to be happening on either end of the top or bottom, depending what's going on. So when you understand that, it will really help focus on what is my objective in this position. The second thing I wish I knew when I was a white belt is that the why is more important than the how. When I was first starting out, I was very good at picking up techniques. Step by step, point by point, I wouldn't miss a step. That was great for getting, 50% of those submissions, sweeps, positions, passes done in live training. But the problem that I'd run into is when they didn't work, I wouldn't understand why. Because all I knew is I had followed the steps 1 through 4 to get to the finish. Something screwed up along the way. Or I got to the finish and it's still not working. That doesn't mean that what I'm doing is wrong. It just meant that I didn't understand why I was doing what I was doing. If you can figure out submissions, passes, sweeps, why they work, not only are you going to be able to adjust those on the fly when they're not working, but you'll also be able to use those whys in other situations that maybe you've never even been taught. Why a pendulum sweep works might work into a position that's not for a pendulum sweep, but that same mechanic applies. All right, so to make that make a little more sense about why the why is more important than the how, is you can be taught how to do a triangle choke from anybody, step by step, exactly how we break it down to get to this triangle choke position. But if something is a little bit off here and you followed all the steps 1 through 8 to get here and you're squeezing and nothing's happening, you kind of wasted everything that you did. But if you understand that the objective of the triangle choke is to push this shoulder against this side of the neck, then you can understand, okay, well, I don't have a good direction on my squeeze. Maybe I need to turn my angle a little more. Oh yeah, now his shoulder is pushing into his neck. So understanding why things work can help you troubleshoot the reasons why something's not working on the fly, which is absolutely invaluable when it comes to fighting somebody who's trying to defend. The third thing on the list is the gradual squeeze method. So this applies for every single choke that I do, whether it's an arm triangle, whether it's a leg triangle, whether it's a rear naked choke, gi chokes. I never, ever, ever want to start at 100% strength on any of those chokes. What I like to do is I start 30, 40% and slowly start making it tighter and tighter and tighter and tighter until they tap. So this methodology applies to all chokes. Doesn't matter if it's a collar choke, you're choking with the legs, choking with the arms. We're going to use a rear naked choke for an example. Once I get to my finishing position, the last thing that I want to do is go 100% on my squeeze right away. Because what happens when you get 100% on a choke is it's only ever going to get looser. And if they can survive the first 3 seconds of your total absolute squeeze, suddenly now it's 90%, then it's 80%, then it's 70%. They're starting to strip grips, and now you've wasted both the position as well as your strength. You can't get back up to 100 anymore. You burnt too many matches. What we want to do instead is, once we know that we've got the position on, is start at like 30%, and then 40%. And then 50%, and it only starts getting tighter and tighter and tighter. And it doesn't have to be fast. You want to keep building up so that they get the feeling that this thing only gets worse. So it's a psychological thing that's going to make them feel more and more trapped as time goes on, but it also spares your energy and only uses so much, because you're going to get the finish by like 60, 70% instead of starting it all the way and then burning out slowly. The next point, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is 90% about control and only 10% about submissions. And this is very easy to misunderstand when you're starting out as a white belt, because you look at, what is my goal? My goal is to get the submission on my opponent. But the problem is, there's most of what you need to do before that point, before you ever get to that final completed submission hold. And that is really what we need to focus on learning first. The submissions are great and they'll come, but if you get good at the position, whether it's bottom or top, getting to it, holding it, making sure you don't lose it, that's when your submissions are really going to amp up and just skyrocket. So try not to focus on these one-off submissions that are like tricks, like something that you might be able to catch somebody who's never seen it before once, but isn't going to work a second time. What you want to work on is getting your controls figured out and getting every position locked in so that you don't have to worry about them disappearing while you're starting to apply your submission. If you think of it like a magic trick, there's a term in magic they call it prestige, and that's the end, that's the big reveal, that's when everything blows up in your face and you can't believe that they chose your card. But there's so much that goes before that. You can't just be focused on the ending before you get there. You got to get there first, and that's all about your control, making sure that you've got total domination of the situation, and that's going to make your game way, way better. So focus on learning controls before you get to the submissions. That naturally leads into my next point, which might seem like the same thing, but it's not exactly. That is the old saying, position before submission, but I want to expand that to isolation before application. It's about isolation first, whether it's a choke, whether it's a joint lock. You need to make sure that you have total control over what you're planning to submit the person with. Once you have that isolated, completely trapped, then the application comes on. This is a major thing that I used to miss at white belts, white and blue to be honest, where I would just jump onto a limb and start pulling on it. That's not good enough. That's not going to get you by in a lot of situations to get higher up through the ranks. So you want to learn early about locking that thing into position before you start pulling on it. You want to make sure that the pull is just like that last little bit of the submission. If you think we can translate the last point into this one, if 90% of Jiu-Jitsu is about control, 10% is about submission, then once you get to the submission, 90% of that submission is about isolation before you get to the 10% at the end, which is the application. And we'll dive just a little bit deeper on that last point with this next one, which is a concept called braking pressure. So braking pressure is what happens when you load up strain and pressure on a joint. You want to have maximum tension on whatever limb you're isolating before you start applying it. So this isn't just about isolation. I can isolate an armbar by pinching my legs in, my knees in, keeping their hand tight to my chest. That's good isolation. But the actual braking pressure comes when I've got that at full tension. Okay, so not only have I got all of my isolation principles in place, but I've got pressure on it while I'm doing it. So you can feel the tension on the arm right here, and then you start applying it. It's going to work way, way, way better for joint locks when you have proper braking pressure in place before you get to the actual mechanic to break. So vibing off of the last point that I made about position before submission and isolation before application, is once you get a good isolation, say on an armbar here where I'm pulling, I'm pinching, I've got the wrist trapped to my chest right here. This is very isolated for this arm. I'm not too worried about any extra movement. And once I've got that, I'm going to apply what's called braking pressure. So instead of trying to drop down to the finishing position and then put my application on, What I'm going to do is keep it as tight as I possibly can on the way down. And now I've maximized my braking pressure. I've put in as much strain on the joint that I'm attacking as I can before I get to the actual application of the joint lock, which in the arm bar's case is the levering against the elbow. And some people, a lot of people to be honest, they screw this up by just getting the position and falling down it. I'm like, okay, I'm in armbar position. Now I'm going to try to put it on. And maybe he's, he's getting a little bit loose here. Maybe he's got a really bendy elbow, and maybe your hip extension isn't enough to finish right here, and you're just gonna waste the whole thing. Don't give it up at this point. Just realize you made the mistake. Come back up, hug it tighter. You wanna get this thing right to your chest. Pinch nice and tight here. Now watch this. Before my back even hits the ground, we're gonna start getting the tap. Okay, that's maximizing your braking pressure before you get to the break. And this applies in wrist locks, shoulder locks, arm locks, foot locks. You want to make sure that any joint lock has significant pressure in the isolation of the joint before you get to the application of the finish. The next thing that I wish I knew when I was a white belt is all about distraction and misdirection. So as you get better and as your opponents and your training partners start to get better as well, you're going to find that the straightforward one move moves don't really work anymore. They see it coming, they can block it quite easily, they've got counters readily available for the most common moves. So what you need to start learning is how to make it look like something else. We want to distract them with what they think is an attack when we're actually sweeping, or vice versa, and misdirections. Let me show you a demonstration from mount. All right, for an example on misdirections and distractions, here in mount, he knows that his arms are gonna be an obvious attack that I'm gonna start trying to isolate. If I can separate one of his arms from his body, he knows this one's under attack right away. So what a lot of people do that have been here enough is they keep their arms super tight. And this is really frustrating to try to peel these off, especially if they're significantly stronger than you. So what I wanna do here as a misdirection or distraction is I'm gonna take my hand and wrist and cut it down across his throat and start putting pressure. You see what happens? His arms naturally have to untie, because if he doesn't, he just gets choked. He's just gonna sit here like this and get choked. So the only thing that he can do is loosen at least one of his arms, and at that point we can start isolating. So we misdirected his focus on the throat so that we can start isolating other things that we were going for. This has a lot to do in a lot of different positions that you set up dilemmas from, and we'll cover that in another video. But anytime that you can use an attack or a dangerous position to force them to do something that you wanted them to do, that's real jiu-jitsu. The last bit of information I want to go over in this video about stuff I really wish I knew when I was a white belt has to do with building your game out from the start to the end. So this is something that a lot of people understandably don't think about when they're starting. They're all very overwhelmed with how vast the game is, and they're just sort of trying to pick things up class by class, trying not to forget the things they learned from last class, and just accumulating and aggregating this big lump of information and trying to plug it in while you're sparring, and trying to figure out these pathways as they become relevant. But what we need to really think about as a white belt is trying to build your game out in certain ways. And for this point, I'm going to talk about having good options from every single position, both defensively and offensively. I'm talking like 1 or 2 A-game options, from guard passing, side control, mount, from back, from full guard, from open guard, from half guard, defensive and offensive, so that at any point you're in a normal position, something you're going to run into in most roles, like the positions I just mentioned. You need to have your go-to moves for attacking and your go-to moves for defending. Also about building your game out. Really important, especially for younger people, to start building pathways and start building game types that are going to actually suit you later into your life. So in the later years, when your back starts going, when your knees start going, is your game built in a way that will protect that? So there are certain guards out there and there are certain moves out there, especially ones that invert up onto your neck, that are terrible for your spine in the long run. You may get away with it for like 10 or 15 years, but by the time you're getting 20 years in, suddenly you're starting to get herniated discs. You can rifle off any example you want of top name guys that were super athletic and super flexy and bendy in their younger years, and as they got older, suddenly they can't roll anymore. And that'd be a tragedy, because we all want to just train, and it never stops. It's a lifelong addiction that can keep you healthy, but you got to make sure that you aren't building your game that's going to break you down in the future. And the last point that I want to make, and something again that I wish I knew when I was a white belt, is you need to know how you learn best. Not everybody learns in the exact same way. Some people are better visual learners. Other people are better at listening and learning. Other people are better at feeling it and learning. And it's not always going to be one of those things for the rest of your life. It may be certain things in certain positions. You may be a visual learner when you're seeing something from the back. You may have to be a tactile learner, a touch learner when you've got somebody on top of you to feel their pressure and their balance. Understand how best you learn, and then try to cater your learning around that. Because it's not up to the coach to understand how best every single person in the class learns and try to cater how he teaches to every single person for each technique. He just transmits the information, and you have to try to absorb that in the way that works best for your mind. Well, I hope this helped. If you have any questions or need me to expand on any of these other things, make sure to drop them in the comment section. Make sure to subscribe so that you see future videos, and we'll see you then.